Would Ted live in these cities?
No, I would not. No.
Redwood Shores, Los Altos Hills, Palo Alto, or East Palo Alto?
But if you can see where the home is right here in relation to the blue area, which is the flood hazard zone, if you can prove to the lender that the structure itself is not in a flood zone, then there's a waiver, and that's called the LOMA, L-O-M-A. And one of the big changes that we've seen in the last couple of years is Assembly Bill 38 that affects properties within the high and very high fire hazard zones.
Hey guys, thank you so much for joining us. We're going to do something really important today. One of the very important parts of buying a house is going through an NHD report. And we have a couple of folks from Home Guard today, and they're going to teach us, they're going to show us what to look for in an NHD report. Because, come on, face it, it's a lot of scary stuff going on. When I read it, I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm living in a flood zone. Oh my goodness, I'm living in a fire zone or an earthquake zone. But do we need to be, entirely afraid of this, or is there a way to read this? So, hey, there are going to be these hazards that's going to be around us, and it's going to be a little scary. How do we look past this? How do we, look at a report and read it to fully understand it and not be scared, shitless out of our minds? Guys, do you mind introducing yourselves, telling us who you are?
Yeah, Ted Stephanos, and I've been in the NHD field for over 30 years. So basically my whole professional life been handling NHD reports. And so with Home Guard over 15 years, and I have my background education in geology and geography. So I'm very good at answering questions and not scaring people, because a lot of, like Charlie said, a lot of this information can look scary, but if once you put it into simplified terms, it may not be that bad. So some people are more worried about earthquakes. Some people are more worried about environmental hazards. Some people may be concerned about airport noise. So you never know what is something that is going to affect a buyer from a buyer standpoint. And from a seller standpoint, you want to make sure you're fully disclosing everything, because in this business that we're in real estate, it's a very litigious business. So you want to make sure you're fully disclosing everything possible to a buyer. And in California, we're unique because no other state has natural hazard disclosure reports. So, we want to make sure we're fully disclosing everything. So what we're going to do is touch on certain parts of the natural hazard report that are probably the most common things that we get questions about, and or you can say even concerns about. And one of them is the natural hazard disclosure statement. Okay, so the natural hazard disclosure statement is a very important page of the NHD report, and that's where you're going to find a series of yes/no check boxes. Okay, so the first two are related to flooding. One is special flood hazard areas, and the second one is dam failure inundation areas. And then we have two different fire zone disclosures that will either be in or not in a very high fire zone, or a wildland fire zone, or a very high fire zone as well. And then we have the earthquake fault zone, and then the seismic hazard zones. So these are a lot of the questions that we get when answering questions regarding natural hazard reports. And so to start it off, the special flood hazard zones are very important, because this may dictate whether or not the individual homeowner or buyer has to pay flood insurance or not. Because whether you're a lender, an NHD company, a city official, we're all looking at the same set of flood maps, and that's going to determine where the flood zones are and whether or not a property is in a flood hazard zone. So statistically, if a property is in a flood hazard zone, statistically, it doesn't necessarily mean that it ever has flooded. It's just based on the fact that it's in a flood-prone area. It could flood once every 10 years. It could be flood less often than that, and may not have flooded, like I said, at all in the past 100 years. So, but nevertheless, that's going to dictate whether or not a property or a lender's going to require flood insurance or not. And so that flood insurance could be pretty costly, upwards of about $1,200 to $1,500 a year. And so if you have a loan, I mean, if you're paying cash for a property, then it's up to you to decide whether or not you want to buy flood insurance. But if you have a federally backed loan, then the lender will require, well, I say will, but most likely will require flood insurance if any portion of the property is in a flood hazard zone. So this is where it gets a little tricky, because there are loopholes with this. So if your property is partially in a flood zone, say the back 20 feet is in a flood zone, here, this next slide will show this better. But if you can see where the home is right here in relation to the blue area, which is the flood hazard zone. So you have the red outline of the parcel boundary. If you can prove to the lender that the structure itself is not in a flood zone, like not in this blue area, then there's a waiver, and that's called the LOMA, LOMA. So letter of map amendment. And so you can apply through that through your surveyor, because you'd have to have a surveyor come out to shoot the precise elevations of the property. And so if you can prove that the elevation of the structure is not within or built above elevation-wise, above the base flood elevation, then you can get what's called a LOMA that documents the fact that the structure is not in the flood zone. Because when you're buying flood insurance, you're only insuring the structure. You're not insuring the whole property or the contents of the property, but you are insuring the structure and the contents within the structure. So the lender is mostly concerned about where the home sits, where the structure sits in relation to the flood hazard zone. So, we can always help guide your path through these transactions, especially in situations like this, because it can get pretty tricky. But the whole idea behind this is hiring a surveyor, seeing if the property or the structure's not in the flood zone, and then get that waiver, the letter of map provision. That has to be applied for through FEMA. Okay. Other zones that are on the statutory disclosure statement are dam failure inundation zones. These do not trigger insurance requirements. That's a question we get a lot, like what's the difference between a flood zone and a dam inundation zone? One is based on flooding that can be due mostly, of course, by rainfall, but dam inundation areas may be triggered by failures of dams, maybe even, weeks after a storm and things like that, where you have runoff and problems with dams and spillways and so forth, like we've seen in the past in California, especially with Lake Oroville. And so, like I said, it does not trigger insurance requirements, but it is a disclosure that needs to be made. And a lot of properties are in dam inundation zones because we have a lot of reservoirs in California, almost 1,000, maybe even more than that. But over the last couple of years, we've seen over 800 maps get updated because of a Senate Bill 92 that passed. So that was passed in 2017, that required dam owners to update dam inundation maps throughout the state. The next one is, no pun intended, but a hot topic, which is the fire hazard zone disclosure. And one of the changes that we've seen in the natural hazard disclosure statement is this checkbox, which is the very high or very high fire hazard severity zone. For a couple of decades, this only talked about very high fire hazard zones. But what happened this year is that CAL FIRE updated the LRA, which are the local responsibility area maps. So these are more the cities and incorporated areas around the state. They updated those maps. And that occurred in February and March, and we're now seeing them become adopted because there was a public review period and then an adoption period that has to be done through cities or fire departments in areas. So we also saw some cities add to these maps as well, like the city of Oakland, for example, added to the maps that came out because strangely, CAL FIRE removed a lot of areas in the Oakland Hills from the high and very high zones, and they put, but Oakland wanted them back in. So Oakland added areas to some of these maps, which we disclose, of course. And so that is the LRA. The SRA, which are the state responsibility areas, those are more the rural unincorporated county areas. And so the third and fourth check boxes that you'll see on the NHD report are related to fire zones. And one of the big changes that we've seen in the last couple of years is Assembly Bill 38 that affects properties within the high and very high fire hazard zones. So just to kind of reiterate here, the LRA fire zones, that was signed into law after the Oakland Hills fire. And the state CAL FIRE takes vegetation, topography, climate, and dwelling density and the weather into consideration when mapping out these zones. But like I said, those originally were just very high zones, but now they've added high and moderate zones into the mapping system. And then you have the state responsibility areas, which are the more rural unincorporated county areas. So, for example, like Boulder Creek and the Santa Cruz Mountains, those would be in an SRA, state responsibility area. Okay, so the state fire hazard zones are, as far as what it means to a buyer, response time, if you're in a state fire zone, could take a lot longer. Okay, so response time is a big deal. And also, they may not have the proper fire suppression equipment, such as fire hydrants and the water systems to be able to extinguish fires. So you might, it really depends on how rural the property is and how far away it is from incorporated areas. So that is important from a buyer to understand as well. So AB 38 took effect a couple of years ago, and it was originally a 5-year pilot program to have government agencies such as CAL FIRE work closely together with fire-prone communities to reduce losses in relation to wildland fires. And so this has a lot to do with what material homes are made out of and defensible space. Okay, so defensible space is really important because that is could save a home in the event of a wildfire, because you don't want to have trees up close to the home. You don't want overhanging branches and limbs that overhang a property. You don't want siding that might be more combustible, such as wood, especially with the roof and also the siding as well. So there's a great website, the readyforwildfire.org website, talks about how homeowners can prepare for wildfires as well. So defensible space is what I was talking about. This is what is currently being adopted right now is the Zone 0. The Zone 0 are areas that are closest to the home, like within 5 feet. And so what they want to see is more gravel and concrete, clearing out of any dead weeds and debris, and keep all branches within more than 10 feet away from chimneys. Then you have a Zone 1, which is like within 30 feet of a building, is to clear out dead plants, grass, and weeds. If you have any wood piles, move that back to what's called the Zone 2, which are over 30 feet away. And then also trim trees as well. So you have a 10-foot gap clearance from other trees. If there's happens to be propane tanks, have those move back as well. So it's all about protecting your home in the event of a wildfire. Now, if you're in one of these high or very high zones, then you also need to, if you're selling the property, you have to have the CAR form, the FHDS CAR form filled out. Okay. So that's when you have to have an inspection on the property, hopefully before close of escrow. Some communities will allow the buyer to assume that that inspection, and they have up to 1 year after close of escrow to get that inspection done. But that inspection is going to basically tell you and tell the homeowner or the buyer, what fire improvement measures have been undertaken on the property and or what needs to be done to pass. Okay, so it might be tree trimming, possible tree removal if trees are too close, and things like that. The next zone that is a concern to many homeowners is earthquake fault zone maps. And so this can really affect the buildability of a property, because if you're sitting right on top of a fault or very close to a fault, then you may not be able to rebuild or add on to the home or do any improvements to the home, such as adding a new bedroom or bathroom or a deck or swimming pool or tennis courts, things like that. So so it's really important from a buyer's standpoint to understand that what the ramifications are of buying a property in a fault zone. So these maps really came about in the early 1970s. So homes that were built prior to the 1970s could be sitting right on top of active faults or potentially active faults for that matter. And so that's where you have to be really diligent as a buyer, maybe do some additional research to find out where these active fault zones are. We'll tell you that in the NHD report, but also where the active fault traces are, or even potentially active fault traces.
Has there been a site in Silicon Valley that has had this problem?
Oh yeah, I'm sure there has. I know of a story in Los Gatos that did occur where there was a potential active fault, because there's a fault called the Shannon Fault that runs through Los Gatos, and it's not considered an active fault. So it wasn't on the state fault maps. It's more of a local fault zone. So you can see our maps that we use that come from Walnut Creek, Los Altos Hills. There's one this is Glendale. None of these faults that are mapped on these city level maps are active faults. They're potentially active faults. So the NHG report that was used was an inexpensive report that didn't cover local zones. And it was sitting, like I said, in the Shannon Fault Zone. And so they were not able to add on to the property. And they had a substandard NHG report that didn't go into the local disclosures. And so they never realized that they were sitting in a potentially active fault zone. And it did affect the buildability of that property, where they couldn't add on to the property. So yeah, I'm sure there are other situations before. In addition to that, I'm not aware of anyone right now off the top of my head, but yeah, it can definitely occur. So
thank you.
Yeah, so it's important to make sure the report that you're using is fully disclosing local zones as well, not just the state zones. So from a buyer's standpoint, building restrictions may apply for properties within these zones, usually, like I said, 50 feet back from an earthquake fault. And whether it's active or potentially active, a lot of planning departments are treating potentially active faults the same as they would an active fault. So not inactive, but active. Okay. Inactive faults, those are faults that haven't moved for maybe several million years. So a lot of times cities and counties, they're not going to be too concerned about inactive faults, but active and potentially active faults, definitely. Airport influence areas is something that we get questions about a lot. Some people, the airport noise could really affect them negatively. So areas near airports, or especially military bases where there might be louder or cargo louder, either whether it's jets or cargo planes, things like that, that could affect the desirability of living in a certain area too. So airport influence areas, these are determined by airport land use commissions in each city and each county. And so that is something that a buyer might want to look at closely as well. Environmental hazards in our NHG report, in our complete report, we disclose this as well. So this will look at contaminated sites within a half mile. Okay, that might be like gas stations and leaking underground fuel tanks. And then we also look at a mile distance for anything that's non-fuel related. So that could be, I don't know, landfills, could be dry cleaners, toxins that have been dumped into the ground, might be contaminants, but it might not have got leached into the groundwater and spread. But a lot of these bigger sites that have had contamination going on for years, those, get into the groundwater, and it does travel with the groundwater as well. So it can be pretty messy. One of the last things to touch on today is tax disclosure. So another report we provide as part of our complete report is Melrose in 1915 Bond Act tax disclosure. So from a buyer's standpoint, this is very important to understand if you're buying property that's within a Melrose district because of the taxes. Okay, so there are some areas, like in San Jose area, we have the Silver Creek neighborhood. A lot of those homeowners are paying upwards of about $1,500 a year in extra taxes that go to fund for schools and things like that. Okay, but there's some. You
wanna just explain to us what a Melrose is, really quickly?
Sure. A Melrose tax is taxes that fund infrastructure, such as new schools, new police department, new fire department, parks and recreation, libraries, things like that. And
it doesn't have to be new, right? It can be an old school, and it funds a school, basically.
Yeah, there can be some Melrose taxes are voter approved, but usually those aren't too costly. Like I'm in Sunnyvale, we pay a Melrose tax for a county library, but it's only about $30 a year. But there are some areas that are, like, for example, the Windermere area of San Ramon, which is a whole brand new community over the last 10 years has been developed. Some of those homeowners are paying upwards of about $8,000 a year in additional taxes that fund the new high school, the new middle school, the new elementary schools, the police, fire, all these departments, park, recreation. But the homeowners that are benefiting from those improvements are the ones that are paying the taxes. So it's not everyone in San Ramon, but it's just that area, and a lot of those are new developments. So these are what are called CFDs, or the community facilities districts, and the tax will usually expire after about 25 or 30 years. And so one thing from a buyer's standpoint, you could essentially be doubling your taxes by buying a property in some of these areas. They also have to understand that there's accelerated foreclosure clauses if the taxes aren't paid as well. So that is something to be aware of as well. Yeah, and so we also, in our tax report, provide PACE disclosure. This is the property assessed clean energy, which from a seller and buyer standpoint can really throw a wrench into the loan process, because if a lender sees that a property has a PACE loan, and PACE loans go to pay for home energy improvement, so a lot of times it's solar, which theoretically becomes a tax on the property, and that could be transferred to the buyer. But if a lender sees a PACE loan, they're going to want that paid off before close of escrow. So if a seller has a $40,000 PACE loan on the books, they may need to have that paid off before escrow closes. So if you're a seller and you have a PACE loan, understand that. And if you're a buyer buying a property, understand that, that could hold up the process of with the lender.
I'm wondering if you mind playing a little simple game. So the question here is, would Ted live in these cities? Because you have 30 years of experience, and just right at the top of your head, binary question, yes or no. Let's see what you say. Redwood Shore.
Well, I would say yes, because that even though it's artificial fill and bay mud, it's been engineered and compacted. So it's different than the Marina District that was built on artificial fill with no engineering at all. So at least Foster City and Redwood Shores, Alameda, they brought in soil such as gravel, compacted it, and then built on top of that. So you do have that protection as well. And they're wood frame structures. They're not made out of brick that could collapse as well. So, yeah, my brother lived in Redwood Shores for many years. So, and I didn't worry about going to visit him. Yeah.
Los Altos Hills.
Well, that's where I grew up. So, yeah.
It doesn't mean you want to live there right now.
Oh, I know.
Now you know what you know.
Yeah. And we were surrounded by oak trees but all my years, so we moved there in 1973 until I moved out in the late 80s, but no fires, nothing. I mean, it's so rare to have, it's a different geography in Los Altos and Saratoga, Cupertino Hills than it is like in Oakland and Berkeley, where you have the winds that could really negatively affect fires. Okay, and so you don't really have that as much. It's not as fire prone as you would. Now, we were there for the '89 earthquake, where we had 3 or 4 homes that were red tagged on our street because of the fact that they were so old. They were built like in the 1900 or very early 1900s, and so some of the foundations cracked in half, and we lost everything as far as chimney. Every plate and dish broke that could possibly break. Probably $25,000 worth of damage, but the house was structurally perfectly fine. So, I love Los Altos Hills. I would live.
So you wouldn't mind being up in the hills, right?
No, that's fine. Oakland and Berkeley Hills is a different matter altogether, though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's go there then. Would you live there?
No, I wouldn't. Not Oakland or Berkeley Hills. No.
Why?
Well, just the fire prone. The eucalyptus and all that, and
right.
The narrow streets are scary. There's even homes that were very old, so they might not be seismically upgraded as well.
Okay.
So that's a concern as well.
Palo Alto or East Palo Alto, from a natural hazards point of view, of course.
Yeah, no problems. Palo Alto, there is along San Francisco Creek a lot of areas that are prone to flooding. So, and then Palo Alto, if you're saying areas closer to Highway 101 are very prone to flooding as well. And it's not like you can ever get, I mean, it's like only a couple feet above sea level as well. So if any of the levees fail along 101, you can have everything all the way up to I think it's not all the way up to Middlefield, but close to that flood. So it would have to be, west of Middlefield. Yeah, Palo Alto is great though. East Palo Alto really has some nice areas as well that aren't well. There's some flooding going on there as well, but yeah, I would stay away from flood zones. But aside from that, they're good.
Okay, let's do an easy one. How about San Francisco?
San Francisco. So you're just talking from a seismic
NHD,
hazard.
yes.
Yeah. Because,
nothing to do with pee or homelessness or any of that stuff.
Well, no, I just it's just too crowded for me too, But just homes that are right smashed up next to each other. Yeah, San Francisco is pretty safe. I mean, you have the San Andreas Fault, but it runs off the coast there, so it's not more prone to earthquake shaking than other communities. The 1906 earthquake, the fire mostly destroyed the city. It wasn't necessarily the earthquake. So, but we're a lot better at extinguishing fires now than we were in the past. San Francisco, it's not bad.
Let's just do 2 more. Willow Glen and Almaden and San Jose. Would you live in either one of these?
Yeah, Willow Glen, definitely. I love Willow Glen, Rose Garden area. I lived in Rose Garden for a few years. And so you said Willow Glen, where else?
And Almaden Valley.
Oh, yeah? Yeah, sure. Yeah. I like this.
So,
that's
nice. they would pass your NHD litmus test.
Sure. Yeah, and
okay.
Like I said, I was touching on this a little bit ago, but it really depends on, how structurally, how the home is built and when it was built. Because if it's an older home that's not bolted down to the foundation, so.
Okay. One last one, and this might be a tad tricky or not. Milpitas.
Well, it depends if they move the dumps. I can't. That sour smell when I used to commute to work in Fremont, I would drive like this because it smelled so bad. You have the afternoon summer breeze that would blow the stench from the
dump.
from the dumps.
But does that become a natural hazard's concern?
Well, I don't know. I don't know how people handle it, but maybe you just get used to it. I don't know. But it's not really a natural hazard. It's more of a man-made nuisance and a hazard. But areas along Highway 101 are very prone to flooding and liquefaction in Milpitas as well. But again, the closer you move to 680, you're a little higher up, less liquefaction, but then you have the Calaveras Fault and the Hayward Fault that run right through that area as well. So I think there's the Berryessa Fault too. So Milpitas, yeah, I don't know. It depends where. It depends where.
There you go. All right, guys. If you haven't already, please subscribe and like this video. It really helps us. And again, all the folks that are on this show today, their information will be in the description and their contact details as well. So thank you again.